Good afternoon, and welcome to our very first AIR Equity Initiative Roundtable, Bridges Toward Equity, Making Workforce Development Work for All. I am Makini Nyante. I am the Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs at the American Institutes for Research, and I am pleased to be serving as your moderator today. Before we get started, I need to make you aware that we are recording this session. The American Institutes for Research, AIR, allows for the recording of audio, visuals, participants, and other information sent, verbalized, or utilized during business-related meetings. By joining a meeting, you automatically consent to such recordings. Any participant who prefers to participate via audio only should disable their video camera so only their audio will be captured. Video and/or audio recordings of any AIR session shall not be transmitted to any external third party without the permission of AIR. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's get into it. So why are we here? The mission of the American Institutes for Research is to generate and use rigorous evidence that contributes to a better, more equitable world. That mission certainly guides the research, evaluation, and technical assistance work we do with clients all over the country and around the world. But the AIR Equity Initiative is how we are living our mission. Last week, we announced a 5-year commitment of more than $100 million to generate and use evidence that directly addresses the biggest challenge we are facing in society today, and that is systemic inequity. The AIR Equity Initiative has 4 areas of focus: education, community safety and policing, workforce development, and bringing diverse voices to the table in research and technical assistance. Part of our work will be to bring people together to share what we know, what we are learning, and what challenges still remain. We are starting those conversations today, and we are glad to have you here with us with a discussion on workforce development. Please look for future convenings around our other key areas, including equity in education and public safety and policing practices. Now, before I go into today's session, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Kim Dumont, who leads the AIR Equity Initiative, to talk to us a little bit more about what we are undertaking with the Equity Initiative. Kim?
Hi, Makini, and thank you so much for welcoming me. I'm delighted to be here with you and Irma, Van, and Mark, and everyone who has joined today's roundtable. I just want to take a few minutes as we begin to introduce you to the AIR Equity Initiative and to share a little bit about what we're worried about and how we will move forward. So systemic inequity is one of the most urgent challenges facing our nation, and its consequences know no bounds. The differences and opportunities that different racial and economic groups face as they move through their lives affects how they experience, how individuals and community experience school, work, healthcare, employment, and policing. In turn, this has longer implications for the wealth you accumulate, the jobs that you hold, and even your life expectancy. I'm pleased to share that AIR has not been sitting on the sidelines. For 75 years, the American Institutes for Research has contributed to and used evidence to improve lives. And now we're building on those experiences to take even bolder action. As Makini just shared, AIR is making a 5-year, more than $100 million investment in generating and using evidence to increase opportunity and address inequities in work, education, community, our own workforce as researchers and technical assistance providers, and eventually health. But because these inequities are so long-standing and deeply entrenched, we cannot build that bridge or cross it alone. So the Equity Initiative will leverage AIR's internal expertise and fund projects and partnerships that look longer term, that work across systems, will listen to diverse perspectives, engage a range of experts, communities, and organizations, and respect local histories. And as we strive for measurable change, and we want to be held accountable for that, we will embrace and fund new or underfunded research and technical assistance efforts. Today's panelists will give you a glimpse of how these many moving parts come together to pursue a longer-term agenda. They'll signal how we can combine high-quality research and high-quality technical expertise with system leaders and program implementers to help us move forward and build a more far-reaching workforce development system where many benefit and few experience obstacles to participation. This is just one example of the types of works we aim to fund so that individuals and communities that are often isolated from opportunity thrive in school, thrive in work, are safe from fear in their own communities, and live with optimal health. As I said, this is a big undertaking. We do not expect or intend to do it alone. We welcome you to join us through these conversations, to reach out through email, and to engage us, to challenge us, and to partner with us as we move forward. And so with that, Makini, I turn it back to you.
Thank you so much for that, Kim. Very well said. Well, today we are going to center our conversation around equity in workforce development. This is an area that already receives a lot of attention and investment, including topics such as automation, retraining, the so-called skills gap that are affecting the strength of the American workforce. The pandemic has also exacerbated existing challenges, but in some ways has also created new opportunities. As Kim has referenced, our goal through the AIR Equity Initiative is to work with communities and organizations to identify and share effective strategies for developing a 21st century workforce. That will be the central point of our conversation today. And before I introduce the panelists, let me ask that if you are going to share your thoughts about this event on Twitter, please use the hashtag # or hashtag AIR for Equity, and feel free to tag us at AIR Informs. So with that, let me introduce you to our very distinguished panelists. So you've heard from my colleague, Kimberly Dumont is the Vice President and Managing Director of the AIR Equity Initiative. She oversees strategic initiatives that advance AIR's mission, working with AIR's senior leadership, staff, and board of directors to invest in important topical areas where AIR and its partners can work to connect research, policy, and practice to contribute to equity. Dr. Dumont has more than 20 years of research experience with a focus on bridging research with the needs of practitioners and policymakers working to improve the well-being of youth, families, and communities. My other colleague, Irma Perez-Johnson, is a vice president at AIR and leads the organization's research and capacity building portfolio in workforce. She is an expert in rigorous evaluations of employment, training, and educational interventions, including pilots and demonstrations, and the application of behavioral insights to improve program outcomes and performance in various policy contexts. With more than 25 years of experience, Dr. Perez-Johnson has led studies of topics such as job search assistance, welfare to work transitions, training vouchers, supports for dislocated workers and individuals with disabilities, and the US workforce development system. Our next panelist, Van Tan Quinlivan, is the Chief Executive Officer of Futuro Health, whose nonprofit mission is to improve the health and wealth of communities by growing the largest network of allied workers in the nation, starting in California. Van is a nationally recognized thought leader in workforce development and author of Amazon bestseller, Workforce RX, Agile and Inclusive Strategies for Employers, Educators, and Workers in Unsettled Times. She previously served as Executive Vice Chancellor of the California Community Colleges, the largest higher education system in the nation with 116 institutions, where she grew public investment in career education from $100 million to over $1 billion under her leadership tenure. Our last panelist is Mark Potter. He is Provost and Chief Academic Officer at City Colleges of Chicago. He leads efforts to advance student success and quality academic experiences in credit, non-credit, and adult education programs. He has successfully led teams to research, design, and implement innovative programs for engaged learning, student success, and retention. Dr. Potter's focus is to expand opportunity to open access institutions for traditionally underrepresented populations who seek economic mobility. Thank you so much for welcoming our panelists to this discussion, and thank you, panelists, for being here today. So let's just dive in. I have a number of questions that I'd like to start with to ask our panelists, and we'll hear from a few of them, and then we would more than welcome the questions that we have from you, our attendees and participants. And I know that you'll be getting instructions on how to submit your questions in the Q&A function, so just stand by for that. So let's start with our panelists. The first question that I have is, why should there be an investment in this area around workforce development? This is the topic that brings us together today, and we've been hearing about this topic, of course, as we've talked about the current state of the labor economy and of the workforce, and certainly Kim and I both have referenced the impact of the pandemic on the current situation. So perhaps, Irma, you can start us off by why we even should be discussing this topic today.
Thank you so much, Martine, and I'm delighted to tackle, or at least provide an initial response to this first question. I would say, simply put, an investment in this area is critical because here at AIR we have concluded that our education to workforce pipeline is broken. Staying true to the guiding principles for the Equity Initiative, in order to develop a learning agenda for the workforce domain of the Equity Initiative, we started with the evidence. For the past 2 years, Harry Holzer and I have been leading a team of incredibly talented AIR staff in reviewing the knowledge base on various topics related to the future of work and labor force participation and what it takes for people to succeed in today's labor market. From this landscaping work, we concluded that our current workforce development system fails to equip way too many of our citizens with the knowledge and skills that they need to access livable wage jobs and thrive in growing industry sectors that offer strong pathways for mobility out of poverty. We need a system that better prepares all of our students for post-secondary success, that raises their completion rates and supports the continued development of skills for all workers afterwards. We need a system that is much more responsive to the ongoing forces of automation and globalization that you alluded to. And we need a system that is not just more dynamic, but also more inclusive, a system that helps our least fortunate workers adapt to continuous changes in the economy and the labor market environment so we don't continue to leave millions of Americans behind. Thankfully, our landscaping work also pointed us in some really promising directions. First, sectoral programs surface strongly as a bright light in the research landscape. These are sector partnerships that train workers for livable wage jobs in growing or high demand sectors, for example, healthcare, advanced manufacturing, information technology. For these programs, there is strong, credible evidence of large and lasting impacts on earnings. But the evidence also showed that these best-in-class examples have proven difficult to replicate and scale, and therefore they benefit relatively few relative to the breadth and scale of need that for effective skill building that we have in our country right now. We also uncovered strong examples of grant-funded and other efforts to translate the sectoral approach to other programs and settings that operate at scale, like community and technical colleges. But these efforts have generally failed to replicate the really strong positive outcomes of best-in-class sectoral programs. So this emerges a really promising potential area of focus for us. Finally, we concluded that we don't really have comprehensive models to reliably help our most vulnerable workers, including displaced workers which we have, hundreds of thousands, if not millions right now as a result of the pandemic. Adult learners, which increasingly overlap with this group of displaced workers, opportunity youth, and justice-involved individuals make ready progress towards stability and economic self-sufficiency in the long term. So these three areas became the focus of our learning agenda for the next 5 years, all guided by the single central question of what will work at scale and within resource constraints to help millions of Americans develop the skills to access opportunity and thrive in the future of work. I'm eager to hear from our other panelists. So all I will say is that this landscaping work, this background work, is described in a paper that Harry and I co-authored, entitled The Importance of Workforce Development for a Future-Ready, Resilient, and Equitable American Economy, which is available on the AIR website. So happy to point our attendees to that paper.
Thank you for that, Irma. Let's hear from you, Van. Why should we be investing in this space? Why should we be talking about workforce development today, from your perspective?
First of all, thank you, Makini and Kim and Irma and the rest of the AIR team for putting on this event and having me participate. The numbers are very stark. And if you had looked at seen the Washington Post article recently, the headline was that there were 10 million open jobs and 8.4 million employed. And so if we want an equitable recovery where we're connecting people with opportunity, good opportunity, we as a nation, with all the collaborators on this call, we need to fire on all engines. And yes, there's a lot of money flowing through the federal government and even state governments, but these public levers tend to be blunt tools. And there's a need to continue to align the monies, the metrics, and the data across public systems so that the intent can be achieved. And so this is a great time for AIR to invest in workforce development and provide the type of evaluation and practice insight to scale what works so that these good practices can continue to be mimicked in public policy so that we can attain the level of scale proportionate to the level of need.
Very well, thank you so much. Mark, why don't you weigh in on this one too, from your perspective? Why should we be investing in this area?
Yeah, thank you for that. So Van has spoken to the urgency of the moment in the recovery from the pandemic. And I appreciate very much Irma's framing of the necessity for an investment in this area. I want to come at this as an opportunity that is created when we bring partners to the table with assets and strengths that complement each other and that create a space for some potentially really powerful work that we hope to see as a result of these efforts in this investment. When we think of what AIR brings to the table, it's that research and technical assistance coupled with their expertise in connecting to the community and to community needs. These assets align very well with strengthening the workforce ecosystem with an intentional framework from an intentional equity framework. When you think about what City Colleges of Chicago brings to the table, we serve as part of our core mission as an engine of inclusive economic growth for Chicago. And core to our mission is to provide opportunity for Chicagoans, for mobility to Chicagoans throughout the city in every neighborhood. Community colleges are among the best positioned institutions in our nation to connect workers to opportunity. Success, though, as Irma has mentioned, requires operating at scale. And this is where I think the AIR Equity Initiative can bring some real tangible results to Chicago by partnering with city colleges. We operate 7 colleges throughout the city, reaching neighborhoods from the north side to the west side to the south side and in between. We also have a sector by sector organizing structure that we call our centers of excellence here at City Colleges of Chicago that are focused on penetrating the relevant sectors, the high growth sectors in Chicago, by securing relationships with employers, creating the highest quality programs possible, and then making them accessible across the city. And so when you're bringing these two institutions together in a partnership through an investment opportunity like this, it's like a Venn diagram that brings the best of both together to really create this tremendous opportunity. We embrace continuous improvement here at City Colleges of Chicago, and AIR will help us grow our impact and scale our impact through our centers of excellence, ensuring that Chicagoans have access to the pathways and mobility that they seek.
Thank you so much for that, Mark. So, all of you in your answer to this question of why we're even here talking about workforce development have talked about the role of evidence or research and technical assistance in addressing these issues and addressing them at scale. So I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about why there needs to be an agenda, a research and technical assistance agenda around workforce development in the first place, and what does that look like? Maybe Irma, you can get us started on this one. Why should we be focusing on these two areas?
Yes, happy to address this question. Well, I would say that in launching our learning agenda, we tried to think really hard about what were the conditions that would be necessary to succeed in this work. In particular, we recognized that this was an undertaking that was unlikely to be fully accomplished in 5, 10, even 20 years. And therefore that we really had to clarify for ourselves the principles to guide the work. In addition to being strategic, selective, coordinated in our efforts, focusing on strategies that best align to AIR's mission, areas of expertise and capacity, with the potential to significantly move the needle in ways that we felt were important. We recognize, based on our experience, that generating evidence alone was unlikely to lead to wide-scale implementation of evidence-based, high-quality programs and practices. While striving to continue to build evidence, we recognize that it would be critical to provide support and capacity building for our partner organizations in building uncovering not just the strategies that are necessary to accomplish our aims, but also uncovering the infrastructure that is necessary to consistently implement and replicate these evidence-based strategies and practices on the ground, while continuing to build the relevant knowledge base. The last thing I would say is that we also recognize that evidence and capacity building alone were unlikely to achieve the kinds of systemic changes that were needed. And therefore, we're committed to partner with our practitioner partners, our learning partners, like the City Colleges of Chicago, like Futura Health, Banton Plumleven, and others, in advocating for the needed legislative policy, regulatory funding, and other changes that are necessary, that will be necessary, not just to implement these kinds of programs, but continue to evolve and sustain them over time. We really need to look at the conditions for success as well.
That's very helpful. Kim, why don't you build on that? I mean, clearly in framing what the equity initiative was going to start to focus on, I mean, the focus on workforce development was a part of that. And there are many other places that you could have gone, but this was clearly one of the priorities. So tell me about how the equity initiative has been thinking about the role of research and technical assistance in really moving this space forward.
And I'm going to shift the question slightly, McKinney, to talk about the perspective I sit in, which is as a funder. So often as a funder, we choose a lane. We might fund research. We might fund technical assistance. And earlier today, I was just thinking in my head, it's like a puzzle. Someone gives you a puzzle. And I'll give money to Irma to assemble the frame for the puzzle, and money to Mark to assemble the pieces that have a zebra pattern, and money to Van to assemble the sky. And so they will all do that, and we'll have 3 pieces of the puzzle that don't fit together. As Mark said, the opportunity here is to share the assembly of the puzzle, but that means we really need to shift how we fund work, how we think about this. So some of the shifts that we're trying to facilitate here is thinking about how can we benefit, as you just heard so eloquently why we need to do this, how can we benefit from different kinds of expertise? In leading a community college system, those folks know very well who is in their community, the kinds of courses, the cadence, the pace, the cost concerns. In doing the technical assistance, the individuals who are specialists in that have also a strong understanding of the resources and constraints on the ground, the kinds of implementation challenges you might get. They have insights about tools that work, and they have working hypotheses about how to improve. And researchers have tools to examine those working hypotheses, to make the tools more efficient, to evaluate the effectiveness. So as a funder, the challenge to us is to think, how do we provide dollars to be a little less prescriptive about the specific study and support the space to build the relationships so people can learn about the different contexts, learn as they do the work to then iterate and make it stronger. And equally important, still uphold all the skills and training, that quality that comes with each of the jobs that they do as a technical assistance provider, as a researcher, as someone who's leading a community college system, as someone who's leading a community organization. We don't want to water those down, so we have to support all those pieces together, and that's unusual. Usually we're very siloed in our approach, and I think we end up with a puzzle that's assembled in a lot of different places, and we don't have a good picture of what that image is that we're trying to build.
Very well said, Kim, and I really appreciate the way that you illustrated just what it is we're going after and what the current configuration of the space is and the opportunity that we are trying to address in the way that we are approaching this work in partnership with organizations like VANS and Marks and Irma and others, but also through the Equity Initiative. So just really great frame there. It's important to make this information accessible to all who are here and those who want to learn about this space, but also who want to help and in really advancing the work that needs to be done. So maybe a very fundamental question is, what does there look like? We've talked about more equitable outcomes. What does equity in workforce look like? Van and Mark, you both spoke to a little bit in that initial question when you talked about bringing others along and not leaving others behind. But I wonder if you can elaborate on that a little bit. What just does the future look like in a more equitable workforce? Let's see, Van, why don't you start?
So Makini, you know that my career has spanned the public sector, the private sector, the public sector, and now the nonprofit sector. And maybe I could just take on that question, what does equity in workforce development look like, and try to answer it from the employer hat. And it often sounds like this. What we want as an employer is to have a workforce that looks like the community that we serve. And as you can imagine, in healthcare, that's particularly true because it also results in better health outcomes. What's unfortunate is that there's a lot of unintended frictions in that process in order to move people as individuals into getting and securing that opportunity and thriving in that opportunity. And I'll just give you just a story. I call it my fish story. Back when I was in the private sector, I did the workforce development where we were partnering with a community-based organization to source candidates from local communities. We then put them into an education program, the community colleges, like Mark was talked about, to close the gap on the skills that we wanted as an employer. There was a particular individual, his name was Aleki, and he would have been, the supervisors all thought he would have been a great fit for the company, a great hire. And after all that training program, he went through the formal employment process and he disappeared from the hiring list. And because we were doing this very proactive workforce development program, we were able to make inquiries like what happened to Aleki in this process. And when they looked in it, it turns out that he had a record that flagged him and eliminated him from the list. He was 15 and had gone fishing, and he caught a fish that was too small. And that resulted in a ticket. And he didn't pay that ticket, he was 15. And that became eventually a felony and went to court, and he didn't show up in court. So unfortunately for this poor individual, he had a record. The company, it flagged his employment, and we were unable to access him. With the proactive workforce development strategy, the community-based partner, which in this case was the Workforce Development Board, was able to work with him to expunge his record. And we were able to hire him into the company. And that was a very positive story after that. But that is, I think, an example of how there's friction, unintentional friction in this process, and why all of us need to work together to do what we do best in order to really just be able to move at scale communities into good jobs.
And thank you for that. That's a great story. Mark, what is your perspective on this? What does equity look like in workforce development?
From an educational perspective, equity appears where you have pathways, and multiple pathways I'm talking about, accessibility into those pathways, and then support for the students on those pathways. And so I just want to touch on those a little bit, each one. The pathways themselves have to be relevant. They need to, of course, lead to good paying jobs. They need to connect students to those employers, and they need to reach into and resonate with the neighborhoods throughout Chicago. I'm talking here on sort of a local basis, and as was mentioned earlier, with the vulnerable populations that are really in need of some pathways into employment. So Irma talked at the top of this panel session about an education to workforce pipeline that is broken on that national scale. Here locally in Chicago, we're really working on that pipeline, that education to workforce pipeline, sort of piece by piece, sector by sector, but ensuring that resonance and relevance with the populations that we intend to serve at City Colleges of Chicago. And there need to be multiple on-ramps and off-ramps into and off those pathways, so that they're meeting Chicagoans and the people who need these pathways where they are at their moment in life, and serving the needs and leading to the goals that they have, either access onto the job market or advancement within the job market. Once those pathways, or once individuals are on those pathways, it's critically important to support the students on them so that students are persisting and reaching their goals. That requires a strong sense of belonging. And that is not an easy sort of universal across the board kind of strategy. It's understanding the needs of the community and ensuring that the pathways and opportunities themselves and what it is that we are offering to potential students resonate with them, that they do have a sense of belonging as they enter onto them, but then how we talk to and treat the individuals with dignity and respect reinforces that sense of belonging that they have on this pathway. It also includes, of course, career support, advising, tutoring, wellness supports, everything that comes with ensuring that students from all backgrounds have what is necessary in order to succeed and meet their goals. I want to say also that our pathways should not predetermine what residents of one Chicago neighborhood have access to versus residents of another Chicago neighborhood. Chicago remains a highly segregated city, and it's important to keep that in mind as you're offering pathways and connectivity to employment to Chicagoans. We don't want to necessarily put students on a track based upon what's accessible and available in their neighborhoods. Accessibility just isn't enough if students don't persist all the way to their goal, whether that be a job, advancement, transfer. And so the supports that I talked about are critical, but there's one thing that I'll just close by mentioning that is critical for equity, will not get us to our equity goals or to our goals of scaling and repairing or fixing or rebuilding this education to workforce pipeline, and that's quality. Quality of the experience, quality of the instruction, quality of the outcomes, quality of those relationships with employers to ensure that students have that access to opportunity.
Thank you for that, Mark. Very helpful. So we have a number of questions from those who have joined us today, and thank you all so much for submitting those questions. We're going to get to as many of them as we can. I'd like to tee up the first question to our panelists, and so panelists, please just feel free to jump in. The first question that's come in is, what resources are currently available to support underserved communities of color, place-based, opportunity youth, and reentry IT STEM pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs? That's our first question. Who wants to take that one on?
Be happy to start. I don't think
Mark, and then we'll go to Irma. So you can start, Mark.
I don't think I'll provide a full answer, but again, I want to go back to community colleges, and here I'm not just speaking as a biased representative of City Colleges of Chicago, but our community colleges throughout the nation really are positioned to serve precisely the communities that are mentioned in this response, whether that's through adult basic and secondary education or English as a second language programming that is often offered free through community colleges, bridge programs that bridge together basic skills with employment opportunities, and outreach programs to reentry populations and opportunity youth. We know that we have these programs at City Colleges of Chicago. What we need to do better is offer them at scale and bring that impact to more people. Irma, I don't know if that's what you had in mind, but go ahead.
No, it's a highly complimentary answer. Thank you so much, Mark. What I would say is, like, there are many resources available out there. I would point the attendee who asked this question to the AIR website. At AIR, we also are joining forces with Mayor and Mayor as an organization has extensive work on apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship in IT, in STEM fields. So there are some resources certainly available within our websites, within clearinghouses. I think this question is so great because we have like a wealth of resources, but what becomes really difficult is for practitioners to help to make sense of that wealth of information. And that's in part the motivation for the partnerships that we've entered into with the City Colleges of Chicago and some of our learning partners. You know, for us as researchers to offer our capacity in making sense of that evidence. I'd encourage you to reach out to us outside of this webinar, this roundtable, and we'd be happy to talk more.
Great, thank you for that, Irma. And we'll provide more information on just how you can follow us and partner with us towards the end of this discussion. Let me get to the next question. Another question here is, how will you define success at the end of year one? So Vaughn and Mark had talked about what the kind of larger picture of equity and workforce development looks like, but what does it look like at the end of a year? Anyone?
At least for me, from my perspective, if at the end of the first year, we have developed really solid, trusting relationships with our learning partners where they feel that as researchers, as technical assistance providers, we've come as true partners to the table to work with them on the issues that they're trying to tackle, the priorities or the priority goals they're trying to accomplish, bringing value to the table because of our extensive command of the research of the evidence base and an extensive experience as technical assistance providers. To me, that certainly would be success. It would also be a success to see others interested in joining these efforts, excited by what we're doing here, and eager to join, to join our efforts and help grow this learning community, and help support this learning agenda we're embarking on at this point in time.
Yeah, very well said. Did
Well, let
anybody
me
else want to weigh in on that? Vaughn, go ahead.
Sure, McKinney. Let me build on that. I, I, I think it's if you talk to field practitioners, there's this phenomenon of pilot fatigue, right? You begin the pilot, and it's a few years later, and then now we have a new cycle. So it'll be so important for the AIR investment to be a glue and to be thoughtful about how to design for scale, so that the scaling is intentional in how it's rolled out. And absolutely, the work that what Irma has laid out is fundamental in laying the conditions. And then the questions become like, how do you begin to codify what is learned through this community of practice? How does it get mimicked into the public policies, into the data systems, into the metrics, into how existing institutions operate or should operate? Those are the things that then can give life and longevity to the good practices that will be identified through this effort, designing for scale.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Another question that we've got them coming in, so please continue to type them into the Q&A field. What role does K-12 play in preparing communities, especially underserved communities, for evolving workforce challenges and upskilling required to be employable? So here's a K-12 question. Who wants to take this one on?
I'll be happy to share some initial thoughts.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I think K-12 plays an incredibly important role in workforce development, or let me say it should play an incredibly important role in workforce development. We know the narrative that students oftentimes receive in high schools, and here is where the equity framework is so important. We have students in some schools, and I know that this is happening in Chicago, who hear nothing but selective university, selective university, selective university, and not enough space or air is given to the possibility that for some students, career opportunity might mean a different pathway. And I'm not saying not college, because oftentimes CTE or career and technical education programs can lead to college, but not necessarily what people have in mind with respect to the traditional pathway toward a bachelor's degree at a selective four-year university. And so the best models out there, I think, are the ones where school districts are aligned with and partnering with their local colleges and universities, providing early college classes in career and technical education fields, seamless transition opportunities between K-12 and college or credit-bearing coursework in career and technical education fields, pre-apprenticeships leading to apprenticeships. Those programs exist, but they need to exist, I think, on again, I'm going to go back to scale, and with some equity lens brought to this, because I think that is where we are sort of sorely lacking in that equity framework.
Thank you for that, Mark. And I'm going to ask that we just provide clarity around what we mean about at scale, because all of you are really speaking to that. So I'd like to expound upon that a little bit. But after this question that came in, which really builds on what you were just speaking to, Mark, which is, are we currently working with any HBCUs or MSIs on this initiative? So I believe, Kim, you may want to talk about the pipeline to partnership program that the Equity Initiative is working on that may connect into this a little bit, but anything to be said about partnerships with HBCUs or MSIs?
Well, quickly, I wanted to interject that our vision for the work in the workforce domain, the workforce learning agenda, is we're starting with the city colleges of Chicago and other best-in-class sectoral programs, as a way of setting this laboratory for learning, these learning partnerships that will hopefully generate models and strategies and evidence to then begin to pilot and test in other settings. So while we are not currently working with or partnering with any HBCUs or majority Hispanic serving institutions, our vision is very much that over time, the work should grow to specifically attend to different contexts in which this work needs to happen. And I think this directly speaks to your question of scale. That's what we mean by scale. On a national scale, we really need to figure out what it will take to replicate these effective strategies and practices in a wide range of settings so that we can effectively reach and help millions of Americans access economic opportunity and mobility out of poverty, in particular in our country.
Thanks for clarifying that term. Kim, did you want to add something?
Sure, I'll just talk a minute about the program that you referenced and these issues around diversity, equity, inclusion, pathways to different kinds of jobs. The research field is also can be criticized for or has space to improve in those efforts. And about 1.5 years ago, the AAR and the Equity Initiative team forged partnerships with Howard University, University of Texas, San Antonio, and Georgia State University to, I will say, strengthen connections between graduate students who know well what careers in the academy look like in the university. That's the setting that they're trained in, and know less well what careers in research and policy organizations and organizations that provide technical assistance look like. And so we have embarked on a shared effort and a partnership with many of the same qualities that Irma described in terms of building trust, being responsive to each other's needs, to engage with graduate students, to learn together, to have pathways that are stronger between our institutions and the communities served by those universities. So we're really excited about that partnership as well.
That's great. Thank you for that, Kim. Now, I've got a number of questions here, and I'd like to be able to get to them before we start to wrap things up today. And thank you all so much for submitting them. One question here is, how can we get more employers to be fair chance employers to address reentry efforts? How are community colleges supporting learners that have or are justice involved? Who'd like to take that one on?
So I'll just share that, you know, it's relationship by relationship with the employers, and it's hard work, and colleges have to invest in this area and have the people who are willing to reach out to and work with employers to make sure that pipeline is strong. And it's not just the issue about justice involved or making sure that fair chances are given to people who have records that might lead them to be overlooked at a quick glance by some employers. But there's also a bias in hiring toward the bachelor's degree and not enough consideration given to the knowledge and skills and disposition that students bring when they have an associate's degree. So that's part of the work also. We've found that apprenticeships are actually a really powerful mechanism by which we can create inroads into employers and show to them that community college students are actually worthy of good paying, full-time professional jobs in their employment settings.
That's great. Thank you for that, Mark. A question here, will there be funding opportunities for technical assistance providers doing this work? I think that would be for you, Kim.
Sure. So, as we said, we're going to work across different systems, education, workforce, eventually health, some work around community safety and policing. And each of those, we see that multiple skill sets and expertise can benefit the work that we're trying to do. And if partnered with researchers, can be even more. And so we're trying to bring this principle of collaboration between research and technical assistance rather than single lanes of research to that space. And so technical assistance is kind of integral to everything that we'll fund, and fewer opportunities to pursue something that's technical assistance alone, but in partnership with others, certainly welcome.
Great, thank you for that. I think we have time for just maybe one or two more questions. So here's one that's come in. Beyond simply being the beneficiary of more diverse workers, what responsibility does AIR see for employers to change their policies and practices to support workers and students so those individuals can participate in and benefit from this work?
I'd be happy to get started on that. Mark talked about skills-based hiring to give consideration to those who have the skills, but maybe not the formal pedigree. That's one set of practices that employers can take a look at in order to access a wider talent pool than they normally would. But also to think about how do you grow talent once they come in. And there are best practices as identified for tuition support, for example. That used to be the domain of only those moving from management and up. Now there's a set of corporations who have stepped forth and offered tuition support for generous tuition support for the frontline workers, entry-level workers, in order to grow their skill sets and their degree attainment. And when you look at those types of options, what they've discovered is that affordability and flexibility are keen. Flexibility because people's lives are very complicated. So the delivery method of the education is very important. And then affordability, one thing that has been found is that when it's tuition reimbursement after the fact, it poses a significant burden on the worker that can't front the workflow, the cash flow. And so just even modifying tuition support from being tuition reimbursement after the fact to actually just tuition support upfront changes the participation rates of workers to be able to skill themselves up so that they can stay relevant in this economy.
Great insight, Vaughn. Thank you. Irma, do you want to wrap this one up? And then we'll go to Kim and we'll wrap this up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'd love to just add a couple of additions to Dan's excellent remarks. I alluded to earlier in the context of describing our whole learning agenda to the fact that as part of our work, we also hope to look at what strategies in particular and approaches could work at scale to help address more systematically, more reliably the needs of some of our most vulnerable, underserved populations. This includes displaced workers. Well, one of the things that the literature clearly shows is that displaced workers are generally much better off if we can prevent the displacement. So right there is a series of strategies that increasingly may become more important, especially because of the churn that the integration of technology and automation has created in our economy. Like working with employers to see the cost benefit of actually like working with their workers likely to be affected by the introduction of technology to upgrade or outscale them to different jobs, different areas, and prevent displacement is a great area for exploration, just like subsidized work, public work, and many other strategies. But it's a great question. It's an area where we definitely hope to be doing more work and partnering directly with employers to not just build the evidence base on these effective strategies, but also demonstrate their cost benefit and cost effectiveness.
Thank you for that, Irma. Kim, did you have final comments?
Yeah, just a final comment was that when we talk about long-standing, deeply ingrained inequities, we inevitably get to these questions about the practices that go on inside institutions, exchanges between individuals, the policies, how policies are implemented, and all the choices that went there. And so throughout, and as you've heard today, that the team that's assembled here and in other places will deeply reflect on what is the status now. What if we made different choices? Could we serve more individuals? Would we include individuals who currently don't have a pathway? And so those will require practice shifts. Some it will be policies that are on the book that get implemented in different ways to make resources available to more students, different groups of students, excluded workers. And for others, it will be about policy change. I think for our work, we're particularly focused on the policy implementation, the programmatic work, the program implementation, and the practices. And what we learn can certainly be instructive or informative to policy, but we're not forcing that. We're not pushing that issue at the moment, but we do hope that people will engage with what's learned to make those changes as well.
Thank you so much for that, Kim. And that's a great way to wrap up the Q&A section. And thanks to all of you who submitted questions, even those we were not able to get to. I want to just take a moment to conclude this by thanking our distinguished panelists. Thank you for being here, my colleagues, Kim and Irma, Vaughn and Mark. Thank you for sharing your insights and your experiences and helping us to launch the AIR Equity Initiative through this very engaging roundtable. This is such an exciting day and momentous day for all of us, and we're just so glad to share it with all of you. To all of those who have joined here today, I ask you to not sign off just yet, because we'd like to tee up a video that we think really captures the promise and opportunity of what we can do with the AIR Equity Initiative. And just to remind you that you will be receiving a post-event survey that we'd love for you to fill out and provide insights on how we can improve for future roundtables going forward. So with that, I'll say thanks to all of you for joining us. Hang on with us for just a couple of minutes to take a look at this video. Have a great day, everybody.
We're excited to launch a great collaboration with our many partners to fulfill a landmark commitment.
To address the most urgent challenge we face as a nation, inequity.
We'll engage in this transformative work with partners who bring diverse perspectives,
while gathering and using compelling evidence to drive powerful change.
All to improve individual lives, our communities, and our society.
And together, we will build bridges toward equity.
AIR is committing more than $100 million to the Equity Initiative, an investment over 5 years to boost opportunities by compiling and acting upon research to confront the underlying causes of inequality.
We'll work side by side with communities that are grappling with issues at the very center of our national conversation on racial equity: workforce development, education, community safety, and policing.
Investing in and locking arms with community experts will accelerate research and technical assistance that address overlooked and even challenging aspects of deep-seated social and economic inequities.
We're proud to take on this charge because it was informed by staff, embraced by our board, and represents the truest expression of our mission.
AIR is drawn to this formidable task of dismantling structural barriers that are leaving too many behind. The urgency of this moment demands we search for solutions that will work.
We do this work because we know equality begins with systems that work for everyone.
AIR alone does not have all the answers. We're conscious of the challenge in front of us and galvanized by the determination of our staff, practitioners, policymakers, and community members to tackle these difficult issues by putting research into action.
But neither is equity a new undertaking for AIR. For 75 years, we've been elevating community voices to close gaps that are rooted in inequality.
And this initiative will leverage our research and technical assistance expertise to contribute to strategies that work for communities that have been segregated from opportunity.
So together, we'll allow evidence to chart our path forward.
Because we believe that when the bridges between knowledge and action are strong, true progress is possible.
We are excited to work side by side with you to help build these bridges to a better, more equitable world.